an interview segment with the New London school explosion survivor Robert Clayton on KDKA Radio, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, January 2nd, 2010.
The Rob Pratt Show, News Radio 1020, KDKA.
Michael Wershaken is here along with Dave Brown, and we are ready to introduce our very special guest from Pittsburgh. David.
Yes, we're going to be talking with Mr. Robert Clayton, who lives out in Wilkins Township, right near Penn Hills. And Mr. Clayton surprised us one day. He had heard us talking about the disaster, and he got in touch and said that he actually survived it. He was 10 years old. In a classroom when the school blew up, and I went out and interviewed him, and his story's remarkable. I handed it to him how he survived, and he and I have become friends since then, and I'm just so pleased to be on here with him this morning.
Mr. Clayton, it's good to have you on KDKA. How are you today?
Pretty good. How are you?
We're wonderful. Hey, can you take us back to that day so many years ago? And I think the thing that I took away from our conversation, Dave and I, after he met you, was how vivid it still was in your mind, and obviously because of such a horrific event, I could understand why. So can you take us back to that day, please?
Yes. Now, where do you want to start?
Let's just start with you being in school, and I'm going to have Dave and Mike kind of guide most of this interview because David has met you before, and he and Mike really have been working on this story. But I just would like to begin with the day of the explosion, being in school. What was like the last thing that you remembered, and obviously after the fact, that when the explosion occurred, what do you first remember?
Mr. Clayton, when you started with me, you were talking about how in that classroom, you hadn't been in the school long, you'd just transferred there, and you had decided you wanted to sit in the rear of the room for a reason when we were talking, and so that's where you were sitting that day. And tell us about the classroom and why you were sitting in the rear, and a little bit about that, and then what you remember about the explosion.
Okay, now I was in a basement room in the 5th grade, and you talk about a life-saving decision. I'd only gone to this school about 3 weeks, and when I walked in the room, the teacher, of course, was up front, and she said, "You pick out whatever seat you want." So naturally, being afraid of teachers, I picked out a seat in the very back of the schoolroom, and that's what saved my life. Because right behind my desk was a row of steel lockers where all the kids put their coats and books and stuff in. And when this thing blew up, which I never heard, I just came to later, but that row of steel lockers fell over on my desk, and I was down underneath the lockers. So I think that's what saved me. But I finally came to in there, and I didn't know what was going on. I could see all around the room, people going everywhere, people hollering. And I seen the principal, Mr. Wagner. I talked to him just a short time before. That's the reason I know him, because I'd just enlisted in that school, and he had to find me a classroom, I guess. So I hollered at him, and of course he didn't hear me because it's just all kind of noise. And I don't know how long, it seemed like I was in a little room with them lockers over top of my head, and I was underneath them. And there were just people running every which way. But finally this guy come and picked me up, and he carried me up to the front of the school. And I thought everything was normal. I was just about half crazy, I guess. I had a fractured skull and a concussion of the brain, so that stuff was all working on me. But he set me down. He said, "Now, Sonny, you wait here a few minutes, and I'll go get my car and take you home." So he took off, and I was standing there, and I got to thinking, well, what's the use of me running that poor old boy clear over to my house to take me home when the school bus is right here? School's practically out anyway, just a few more minutes it'd be out. So I started for the school bus, and another guy grabbed me. He said, "Where are you going?" "I'm going to get on the bus and go home." He said, "No, you're not." He said, "You come with me." So he set me in the front seat of an ambulance. And there was another kid there beside of me. I think it was a little girl named Marie Beard, but I'm not sure. But then in the back, where you normally put hospital beds, it had kids piled in there just like cordwood. And I don't know how many was in there, I suppose 8 or 10. But they took us over to a hotel. I don't know the name of the hotel, but they had mattresses laid out on the floor, and they had kids all piled up there on that mattress. There were several mattresses, as I remember, along the whole area of that floor. And they was taking kids, I guess, for the amount of injury they thought they had. So they finally got down to just me and some little girl left. Her name, I'm sure, was Marie Beard. And they said, well, let's take this boy first. Well, I was always afraid of the doctors, because every time you went to one, the first thing you done was get that needle out to give you a shot. So I said, no, don't take me, take this girl first. And I've heard my mother brag so many times in the past about how brave I was.
That's only a mother's love. You understand that? That's your mother's love. That's what you call it. She just loves you. That's why she was like that.
Oh, yes. And, of course, I didn't want to tell her because it's kind of fun being a hero.
You know, one of the things, and if I can interject here, how many people, children actually died and people that day? Dave?
Well, there's never been an exact count on the death toll. Right now, the state of Texas has a marker up at the site that says 311, mostly children. The exact number will never be known because this was a big oil field school, and as Mr. Clayton said, he had just been there 3 weeks. Children came and went with the rush into the oil field, and all the records in the school blew up with the explosion. So they tried to piece together who was there and who was killed and who was missing. A lot of parents picked up and left the region immediately after the school explosion because they couldn't, it was just too traumatic to face another day there. Some who lost children very possibly left without any record. The death certificate system in Texas was very rudimentary at that time. They tried to get information on everybody, but we know that more than 300 people were killed, and mostly children.
And one of the things I think we all have to put our mindset is the fact that they didn't have emergency drills and disaster teams, and we didn't have medvac like we do today. I mean, this was a very primitive time, right?
Well, and this is also the setting in which all this is happening is the last great boom in American history. This was the East Texas oil boom, where they had found, 6 years earlier, they had tapped into an oil field that became known as the Black Giant. And this oil field was the largest then known in the world. It was huge, and its discovery coming as it did during the Depression, you can just imagine the number of people who flocked into this area for these jobs. I mean, there was a town that within a matter of days, its population went from 800 to approximately 8,000. And we're talking over a weekend. People are just flooding into this area, and so after this disaster, many of these families didn't have long-standing roots here. They were here for the job. They were here to build a home for their families, and that had just been taken away from them.
And some people, as you said, Dave, they lost their whole family.
Right.